On the Edge, in association with Uncensored Magazine.
Tonight, we ask some serious questions of nature conservationists, environmentalists, activists, and those with any tinge of green in general. What if you've got it wrong about global warming for the last 30 years? What if there is no science at all to back up your wild claims, and this is just a plan to roll out more taxes and place power in the hands of an unelected world government? What if this is the final piece in the jigsaw to remove all freedoms and surrender to global fascism? They wouldn't do that, would they? Let's find out as we go on the Edge. Hello and welcome. I'm AlexG, and don't forget, tonight this show is live. And here's Melissa to tell you all how you can interact.
Thank you, Alex. Text in on 86686, type the word EDGE, leave a space and then your message. Standard network charges apply, and I'm waiting to hear from you.
And of course, Melissa will be giving us the cream of your comments throughout the show. Now, my guest tonight is described as a political commentator, a blogger, a libertarian, and an author, James Delingpole. James, welcome along. We have your new book here called Watermelons, which is out today.
Yeah, I highly recommend it, Alex.
Well, I would hope so, elsewise we're on a real sticky wicket this evening.
Bloody boring programme.
Indeed. So, watermelons, green on the outside, red on the inside. Yeah. So who are we talking about here?
We're talking about, I suppose, the way the environmental movement has been hijacked.
Right.
I think we all like clean rivers, we all like countryside, we all want the air to be less polluted. And I think probably in the early days when, for example, they were creating national parks in America, you know, in the early days of the Sierra Club, for example, environmentalists were doing a good thing. You know, I mean, Patrick Moore, one of the Canadian co-founders of Greenpeace.
Right.
When he founded Greenpeace in the 1970s, there was a lot of work to be done with the environment. You know, there was whaling, there was industry pouring effluent into rivers unchecked by any kind of regulation.
Yep.
So my beef is not with the environment itself. It's not with conservation, which I think is a good thing. My beef is with the way the movement has been hijacked and the way that lies are told to us and junk science is encouraged in order to impose on us what, for want of a better phrase, to use the phrase often used in documents like the United Nations Agenda 21, they want to create a new world order.
Now, the moment you say New World Order, that immediately makes you a conspiracy theorist.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's a bit in the book, I was trying to look it up earlier, there's a bit in the book where I say, look, I really, really did not want this book to be about conspiracy theories. You know, I'm not a 9/11 truther, I'm not a birther, I don't believe that that Princess Diana was assassinated by MI5 on the orders of the Duke of Edinburgh because she was known to be pregnant with Dodi Fayed's love child, because I think actually if you look at the evidence, you find that she wasn't pregnant, for example, and also the royal family are not in the business of bumping off awkward members and probably haven't been for about 400 years.
I think there's going to be a few people taking issue with that.
Sorry, okay, well,
but,
maybe that's the second half.
I think that's hour two, definitely.
Two, okay, right. And I don't believe, by the way, that if you pull off the Queen's head, her true reptilian features are exposed underneath. I don't believe in the, I'm sorry, listeners, I don't believe in the Babylonian Brotherhood either. But I do believe that the global warming industry, you couldn't quite call it a conspiracy in the sense that the different parties did not sit down at a table and say, how can we invent this non-existent problem and make lots of money out of it and take over the world? It doesn't work like that. It's rather what I call a concatenation of shared interests.
Right.
In that, for example, if you are an activist working for an environmental charity like Greenpeace or the World Wildlife Fund or Friends of the Earth, you have a vested interest in stoking up public hysteria in order to generate income. You know, you're not going to give money to Project Thin Ice run by Greenpeace to save the polar bear if you believe that the polar bear is good for another 10,000 years. You might be tempted to give to Project Thin Ice if you think the polar bear is going to die tomorrow unless you give it a tenner. So that's the environmental movement.
But this is the thing with scientists. You say in your book, it's very much the case that they realise that they have to sensationalise everything to get the coverage and to get the story out there.
Exactly. Scary. They've got to give scary scenarios in order to, well, to build up their power base. I mean, I think one of the great misconceptions about scientists is that they are a kind of priestly elite who are unconcerned by the issues that normally, you know, they don't need to make a living, for example. They are pure seekers after truth, incorruptible. All they want to do is serve up the honest science because that's what they do in their white coats with their Bunsen burners and things. It doesn't work like that. Like everyone else, they got to eat. They got to feed their families. And suppose you're a scientist and you want to, what you want to study is feeding habits of red squirrels. You ain't going to get the funding. If you want to research how the feeding habits of red squirrels have been affected by climate change, you might well get the funding. So it's an industry. So you've got the NGOs who need to generate public hysteria. You've got the scientists who need to get grant funding. And then you've got the rent-seeking corporations. You've got people like Al Gore. I mean, Al Gore has made a fat fortune on the basis of things like the Chicago carbon trading exchange, now defunct. But a lot of money was made there. You know, Goldman Sachs were one of the co-owners of the co-founders of the Chicago Trading Exchange. When you consider, for example, all the rent-seeking fat cats who are making a fortune right now out of wind farms, you know, for example, the Prime Minister's father-in-law, Sir Reginald Sheffield Butt, has got 8 wind turbines on his Lincolnshire estate. He is making £1,000 a day just to sit on his well-upholstered backside watching those turbines spin, or rather not spin, as they can't do if it's too windy or if it's not windy enough.
And he's contributed to the building of these at all?
He's contributed absolutely sweet FA. He is just getting the money, £1,000 a day, essentially from the taxpayer, or rather the energy user, because on everyone's electricity bills is a sort of an additional tariff which is imposed on that bill to pay for renewable energy, like wind farms.
And this is the thing, people are being steered away from seeing that the reason their energy prices are going up is nothing to do with the unit cost of the energy per se.
Absolutely.
It's everything else that they're paying
Well, there's a
for.
very good example of that. In America, the price of gas has collapsed. I mean, it's more than halved. Why has the price of gas collapsed? It's because of the deposits of shale gas, the Marcellus Shale, for example. America has, in the last 5 years, it has gone from being a net importer of gas to a net exporter of gas. Now, the extraordinary thing is that under Blackpool, right now, underneath the North Sea, are trillions of cubic feet of shale gas ready for exploitation. What are we doing at the moment? We are not exploiting those reserves. Instead, we are carpeting the country with wind farms, which cost 3 times the amount of conventional energy on land, 9 times the amount of conventional energy if they're based on the sea. Now, if you believe that actually what we should be doing is having cheaper energy, making our industry more efficient, not driving pensioners into fuel poverty and making them die of hypothermia, as many have done this winter, then you might have a beef with the environmental movement, which of course has been urging these monstrosities on us.
And this is the thing about wind farms. They actually blight the landscape and have a big detrimental effect on nature.
Alex,
where are we going with this?
This is one of my particular beefs with the environmentalists. If, as they claim, they care so much about nature and about the planet, about Mother Gaia, why are they raping Mother Gaia with these appalling monstrosities? These wind farms, every year in America alone, 400,000 birds are killed by by being magimixed by these wind farms. They also cause bats, I think, to implode. They ruin the views for miles around because, of course, they tend to be erected on uplands. So, in the name of saving the planet, these environmentalists are, in fact, destroying it.
But surely they're doing this with the best of intentions.
Do you know, I think a lot of these guys are doing it with the best of intentions, but we know about the road to hell being paved with good intentions. If you look at the Climategate emails, what you don't find is the scientists cackling to themselves, you know, I wonder how much longer we can keep this scam going.
It's almost like, oh drat, we're not being able to back up what we really want.
You have an element of that, certainly. That they are, as we get closer to now, you see in the emails a certain sort of discomfort with the fact that the global climate is not doing what their computer models predict it will. They're a bit worrying about the absence of warming after a certain point. But nevertheless, what you also see is that these guys genuinely, sincerely believe that global warming, man-made global warming, is a serious problem. Such a problem that they believe it is their moral duty to bend the evidence and present a stronger case for global warming than is supported by the science in order to persuade the politicians to act now. So it's what's known in the business as noble cause corruption.
Right. That's a good phrase. That's a good phrase. So moving back to watermelons. Something I picked up today is that...
Nothing nasty, I hope.
No.
Nothing catching.
It's curable, whatever it is anyway. The title's being changed for Australia to Killing the Earth to Save It. Don't they have watermelons in Australia then?
I think that... well, publishers, you know, they like different titles. I think the Australian publisher was keen to make it clear that this was not about the Australian Green Party with a capital G, and he was concerned there might be a conflation between Green with a capital G and Green with a small g. That was
right. Almost making it more does what it says on the tin then, is where they're coming from. As we would expect from the Australians, they want it direct.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you. And a couple of minutes before the break, the thing about the green strategy here, if it's taken to the logical extreme, we are talking about total and complete de-industrialisation.
Yes.
Not just of the Western society, but of the whole planet. So surely this isn't possible.
One would hope so, certainly, if our children and grandchildren are to have any kind of future. Maybe we can talk about this after the break, but one of the things that concerns me is that, you know, future generations are often invoked by the Greens to justify their extremist policies. But actually what they're doing is creating a world in which future generations are going to have a worse standard of living than their parents and grandchildren. Because, of course, if you rein in economic growth, as the Greens are so keen to do, then what you have is people's living standards falling. You have fewer jobs available. You have, you know, less money, oddly enough, to spend on the environment.
And this is the thing. I always say, I'd love to see these people walking the talk that they're putting out. For instance, Al Gore, you've mentioned. This is the guy who has bought near seafront property in San Francisco, so that if his model of what is going to happen to the planet actually happens, he's bought something underwater.
Same with Tim Flannery in Australia. He's got a riverside property, yet he gets paid $180,000 a year by the Australian government to warn us all of the great man-made climate change peril, which is going to cause sea levels to rise and presumably drown Tim Flannery's and Al Gore's house.
Absolutely bizarre. So anyway, don't forget, this is your show, so we want to hear from you. Text in on 86686, that's 86686. Start with the word EDGE, E-D-G-E, leave a space, give us your message. We're back after the break.
On the Edge in association with Uncensored Magazine. On the Edge in association with Uncensored Magazine.
Welcome back to On the Edge. You've been keeping Melissa very busy in the break, so let's hear what you've had to say.
Thank you, Alex. Pat has texted in saying, why doesn't your hero, David Cameron, put the brakes on the green agenda? Another viewer has texted in saying, Edge TV always criticises those who try to discredit all conspiracy theories by association, yet they're happy to discredit the green agenda in the same breath. Someone else asks, is tonight's show sponsored by BP? And somebody else has texted in saying, how much subsidy do we pay for nuclear power, which pollutes the earth for millennia? And what will the public cost be to decommission old nuclear plants? And someone else has texted in saying, can we refuse to pay the extra added for wind farms?
Well, that's an interesting one. Start there.
What a great selection, isn't it?
Yeah.
What, we're going to do the wind. Well, I wish, Alex, I wish we could say no. I do not want a penny of my money to be spent on these monstrosities. No.
I mean, do we have any idea of what sort of percentage of energy bills we're talking about that they've been hiked up in order to cover the costs that they're talking about?
No, we don't. But we do know that by 2030, the amount that the wind farm industry will have been paid in public subsidies, this is really rather shocking, £130 billion.
Blimey.
On essentially just, I mean, thrown out of the window, you know, to no purpose whatsoever.
I mean, I remember David Bellamy saying right from the start, when it looked like we were going towards wind farms, that this was absolutely ludicrous and was not going to work.
It's interesting, isn't it, David Bellamy, who, you know, he's a pretty serious environmental campaigner. He actually got arrested in the 1980s for protesting against the dam. So I don't think anyone could accuse him of being a shill of big oil or big coal or whatever, big carbon. David Bellamy has taken the right side on this issue. By right side, I mean the empirical side. He's looked at the evidence, seen what is true and what isn't true, and taken a position accordingly. Would that other people were quite so level-headed. But, and he's been vilified for this, of course. I was interested by the BP.
Well, I was going to say about that obviously you're all in the pay of big oil.
Yeah.
That's why you're out there, and this is your mission.
That's why, Alex, you and I are so incredibly rich, because this show has indeed been sponsored tonight by BP. No, to address that question seriously for a moment, some viewers may remember that a few years ago the BP ran a campaign called Beyond Petroleum, in which they tried to reposition themselves, to greenwash is the phrase, reposition themselves as a carbon-friendly business. Nothing to do with oil, not us, you know. And
greenwash, for those who don't know, is effectively where you use spin and PR to make it look like you're green.
Yeah, exactly. It is unfortunately a fact that big oil spends a lot more money sponsoring climate alarmism than it does on people like me. More's the pity. Because
so they're actually sponsoring the warmist side.
Oh, totally, because you see, the thing about the multinational corporations is that they can wear all the added costs which are imposed on them by governments. They can shift their operations to those countries where there are not such stringent regulations. And all it does, I mean, it's the same with Europe, for example.
Right.
Big business was always pro-Europe because it could wear the additional costs, or it was beneficial because what it did was shut down their smaller competitors, which could less easily afford all these regulations.
Okay, if we move on to your pal David Cameron, apparently. Goodness
I know.
me.
I think before sending in text like that, they ought to do their research. Barely a day goes by without me having a go at David Cameron in my blog. He was a mate of mine at university, but I have to say I'm very disappointed with the direction he's gone in since. I don't think he's making a very good job of being a Conservative Prime Minister, that's for sure.
And this certainly gets onto something we were discussing before the show, in terms of when we're talking about a political spectrum running from red to blue.
Indeed.
It's almost like this has become redundant because you've got Conservatives with far left policies, and you've got Labour with far right policies, and it's almost like we almost need a new language of politics to decode this.
I think it's certainly a problem that in the last election, all three main political parties went into the election on the same ticket as regards the environment. David Cameron said, vote blue, go green. None of them was committed to repealing the Climate Change Act, which is one of the most disastrous pieces of legislation in recent memory. It commits the British taxpayer to spending £18 billion a year for the next 30 or 40 years to decarbonise the UK economy. Well, I don't think the Chinese are decarbonising their economies. I don't think the Indians or the Brazilians are decarbonising their economies. So all we're doing is making our business less efficient, making the cost of living more expensive, to no useful purpose whatsoever. And
in terms of Cameron jacking in the green agenda, you don't see that happening anytime soon?
The bad news on that score is that Cameron is, I believe, a true believer. I don't know how much influence Sam Cam has had on this. I do know that...
that's his wife.
That's his wife.
Sam Cam.
Sam Cam. Yep. I do know that somebody went to see David Cameron, who knows about this kind of thing, and said, your environmental policies are absolute lunacy. And David Cameron said, no, I've just had a meeting with Al Gore and he really knows his stuff. Right. That's the bad news. The good news is, that Cameron is a politician, a consummate politician. And I think that if he senses the way the wind is blowing, if public skepticism towards the man-made global warming myth grows any greater, then it will become electorally sensible for him to adopt a more sensible policy regarding climate change.
It's almost like we're waiting for a tipping point.
We're
There's going to be something that's going to do it, and I'm certainly going to get onto Climategate in a moment. Just very quickly mop up the other comments there. We're talking about nuclear as an option, but the problem is the costs of decommissioning, and so there are hidden costs in that.
Yeah. But I noticed that the emotive language used of the text, that it pollutes the earth for thousands of years. Actually, if you look at how the nuclear industry disposes of its waste, it is now, the technology is in place now for nuclear waste to be enclosed in glass, which keeps it safe for millennia, and it can be stored in really tiny spaces. Now, if you're going to have a go at nuclear for the decommissioning costs, I don't believe any allowance has been made for the decommissioning of wind farms, which genuinely don't work. They don't work when it's too windy, they don't work when it's not windy enough. They're expensive, they're environmentally damaging.
So we've got maintenance costs to think about, and indeed, what's their life cycle? At what point do they get
Well, their life cycle is
amended?
very, very short.
Right.
That's another thing. So you know, if you believe in sustainability,
there's the S word.
Wind farms are not very sustainable. You know, they're a lot less sustainable than nuclear, say.
And certainly there was the comment about conspiracy theories in general. And
I wish to apologise. I would not wish to alienate any viewers who believe that Diana was assassinated. I want everyone on my side rooting for me in my battle against the Green Menace. And
I think the thing that most people need to appreciate is these things are so in-depth, you can really only specialise in one or two. Else why? Because
I could be wrong. I could be ill-informed about I haven't looked into it enough.
And I think this is the thing about climate change. On the surface, and we'll certainly get to this later in the show, where we talk about some of the instant knee-jerk reactions that you get dinner parties and cocktail parties from people.
Yeah.
It is one of these things that the information, if you like, is just spread so thinly and so wide. Actually getting the full picture is really, really time-consuming. And that probably leads on nicely to the whole Climategate affair.
Right.
Now, briefly, can you quickly summarise what this was and why this is so important?
Yeah, Climategate was the leak in November 2009 on the eve of the Copenhagen Climate Conference of a large cache of emails from the Climatic Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, which runs one of the 4 main global temperature data sets. And many of the scientists at the Climatic Research Unit are also lead authors on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's reports, the IPCC. And the IPCC, according to President Obama, is the gold standard of international climate research. So these guys, these scientists, are writing the papers on which governments base their policy. So when governments start wind farm building programs, when they impose environmental taxes on your flights and so on, they are acting on information given to them by the scientists at institutions like the CRU. So therefore, if it turns out, as indeed it does seem to have turned out in the Climategate emails, that these scientists are not applying what you might call best practice to their scientific method, when they are abusing their positions of authority in order to close down, shut down the argument from scientists who disagree with them, trying to destroy the careers, indeed, of scientists who disagree with them, meanwhile trousering millions of pounds and dollars in public money. You know, you would have thought, given that the Climatic Research Unit alone has snaffled something like £27 million in funding from you and me, you would kind of think that they have a duty to the taxpayer to deliver sound science, not bent science. And
it's almost like they're actually confused as to who their loyalty should be to, those giving them funding or those who actually provided that funding in the first place.
But beyond that, I mean, they ought to have a regard to the truth. I mean, you know, I mean, I don't want to get all high-minded about this, but I mean, what kind of scientist are you if you don't cleave to what is? You know, it is not your job to try and change government policy through political activism. If you want to do that, go and join Greenpeace, but do not go and work at the Climatic Research Unit.
We had some comments on our forums from a character called Observer, and he quotes this following quote: "Nations must invest $37 trillion in energy technologies by 2030 to stabilise greenhouse gas emissions at sustainable levels."
Yes.
So how much is it costing here in the UK each and every year in green taxes because of the AGW scam? I mean, you've mentioned that the 18 billion, I think you said?
Yeah, over 18 billion a year. That's by the government's estimate, so you can probably double that. The figure, I mean... If
that's as accurate as how much the Olympics costs, that gives you an idea of the fact of their
or like PFI.
Yeah.
You know, these things always overrun massively, or the NHS supercomputer.
Oh, lovely, which
all
never
those
ever came
things.
to be.
I mean,
yeah.
that figure, 37 trillion, I've heard the International Energy Agency says it's going to cost 45 trillion pounds or dollars, is it, to decarbonise the global economy. Well, $45 trillion is a fair amount of money.
So in terms of where it's going, we talked about wind farms.
Yeah.
So what other technologies?
Solar.
So they're going with solar as well.
Well, solar's been a similarly great disaster to wind farms. You know, you've got the embarrassing example of President Obama pouring taxpayers' money into green tech to generate these green jobs, all these green jobs that are going to emerge. I think so far he's created jobs at a cost of about $5 million per job, per green job. And there's other research. A company in Britain called Verso Economics did some research which suggests that for every green job that has been created in Britain by public subsidy, 3.7 jobs have been lost in the real economy.
Right.
So green jobs actually kill real jobs.
One last thing before we go to the break. Observer asked the question, why has the planet not warmed up in the last 15 years?
Yes, a good question, Observer. Well are you named Observer.
And this is literally the case, that most people won't realise this, but the actual data shows that nothing's happened since 1998.
That's right. It's been pretty much flat. I mean, there've been the odd blips, you know, El Nino effects. And don't forget that we are coming out of the Little Ice Age, so, you know, there are going to be record-breaking temperatures, but that does not necessarily mean that we are causing it.
And this is what happens when you start from a low. Of course it looks higher.
And of course it does.
OK. Don't forget to keep texting in on 86686 with the word EDGE at the start of your text, and we'll be back after this break.
On the Edge in association with Uncensored Magazine. On the Edge in association with Uncensored Magazine.
Thank you very much for all your texts. You've really been keeping Melissa busy, and here she is to tell you what you've been saying.
Thank you, Alex. Denise has texted in saying, the manufacturers of wind turbines state that it's okay to live near them, but I bet none of them do. Paul in Bath says, I happen to think that wind farms are beautiful and graceful. I also think that your guest is a dodgy misinformation agent.
Ooh.
John in Barrow says the world's biggest wind farm has just been finished offshore in Barrow, 100 turbines, and it's a hideous eyesore. Somebody else asks, do you have a website where someone can go to have a look at the evidence you have? Dave has texted in saying, it all comes back to the same thing, money and the desire for money. Greed and evil have taken over the world. And somebody else has texted in saying, if warming is fake, will they tell us in a few years, look, these measures are working. See, we've kept the temperature down.
Right, yeah. OK. Well, in terms of what we've got there on wind turbines, we've got some people saying they're an eyesore, some people saying that they're beautiful, other people saying, well, I don't want to live underneath one, and do any of the people building these saying that they're great?
Good range of text there. I think what I'd say to Paul in Bath is that it's a funny thing, Taste. For example, I might believe that what the countryside really needs now is to be covered in 50-foot phalluses made out of stained glass.
Right.
Is that necessarily an argument for so doing? I would suggest not. Just because Paul in Bath happens to believe that wind farms are beautiful and graceful, was the word,
I think so,
is not really what I would call an argument for destroying the countryside with them. Sorry, Paul.
But of course, you're a dodgy misinformation agent.
Oh, but of course I'm being paid by whoever big anti-wind is, yeah.
Quite crazy stuff, but there we go. So the question has to be asked, is this all therefore about money? The fact that wind farms have been monetised, follow the money.
Definitely follow the money. And you know, the person who was concerned about greed and evil taking over the world, I don't think this is a new thing. I think greed and evil have been with us for many and they will always be with us. But our job as freedom-loving people is to try and stop the greed heads taking over the world and controlling our lives and making us miserable and poor.
And certainly we have that question in terms of websites,
yeah.
evidence, and
Can
whatever
I just
else.
show
Yeah,
everyone?
push it, yes.
One of the things I'm really rather pleased with about this book, and I didn't do this myself, I got some really, really clever, diligent people to make sure that the references, that all my claims in the book are referenced, so it's bang on. So you read this book and you read a claim about this or that, and you know that you can go to the back and you can find that the reference to where you can confirm that what I say is true.
What it is.
Because I didn't want it to just be another kind of opinion book where, you know, well, he says one thing, but the British Wind Energy Association says something else. Who do we believe?
And I think this is the thing about the way the book reads. Many of these titles that go into the actual science get bogged down.
Yes, that's a very good point.
Whereas what you've got here is, it answers that question, and this is one of the questions that I've got here in terms of things that people say. So, I mean, they ask, why is your interpretation of the science more valid than that of hundreds of scientists who specialise in this field?
All those questions I try to answer. But oddly enough, that only takes me about the first third of the book. What I go on to explain is that this is not really a debate about science.
It's for psychology, isn't it?
It's about psychology, it's about sociopolitics, if you want to use a long, complicated, silly word. It is this. The environmentalists would love you to think out there that there are these mysterious gatekeepers of truth, the white-coated ones, the scientists who know, the experts, and nobody else is qualified to comment on this. Well, I've never been Prime Minister. I've never had any experience of it whatsoever. I can still tell you that David Cameron is doing a pretty rubbish job. You don't need to be a policeman or a lawyer to know that when somebody steals your purse, a crime has been committed. In the same way, all you need to do with, for example, the Climategate emails is to have an idea about what real science is supposed to do and compare it with what these scientists are actually doing. And you realise that they are abusing the scientific method.
And I think it actually goes further than this, because in a previous life, Climategate broke at a time when I was working for a part of the government that dealt in climate change issues. And I basically said, Climategate, this is the end of the whole global warming scam. It's going to collapse.
You'd have thunk.
And you note it in the postscript in the book that one of the things that you find hard to believe is that somehow they've managed to fudge this so that actually anybody who just reads what's in the Climategate emails will know straight away that this is a load of hokum. But nobody does.
It hasn't happened. It is like the final scene of Terminator 2. The monster just keeps coming back and back and back. You know, you hear the same phrases used over and over again as if nothing has changed. You know, that what is it, 98% of the world's top scientists agree that global warming is happening, etc., etc.
I've just got this picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Al Gore in the movie. And that would really be it, wouldn't it? And I think this is the thing, because one of the things, the automatic knee-jerk reaction from people when you say that this is a complete load of nonsense, if they are trying to defend the status quo and the establishment view, dare we call it, they will say, well, what would motivate people to make this stuff up?
Exactly. So that is in a way what the book is really about. Why would they make this stuff up? It's interesting that when one gets involved with debates with the other side these days, the same techniques are used again and again by the opposition, people who think that I'm an evil denier. One is the ad hominem, you know,
against the person.
James Delingpole is a denier. He doesn't care about nature. He is greedy. He is selfish. He's in the pet pay of big oil.
Right.
That's the ad hom. And the other technique is what's known as I'm sure you know, the argumentum ad verecundiam.
I see.
The appeal to authority. So the Royal Society says that global warming is happening. There are lots of distinguished scientists in the Royal Society. Therefore, they must be right and you must be wrong. Well, there was a famous example of this from history. Hitler commissioned this paper against the Jewish scientist Einstein, and it was published under the title "100 Scientists Against Einstein," purporting to prove that Einstein's Jewish science was wrong. Einstein's response to this was, "Why would I need 100 scientists? If I'm wrong, one would have been enough." And I think there's a misconception about how science advances. You know, the idea that there can be such a thing as a consensus in science is a ludicrous idea. You know, for example, before the 20th century, no one believed in continental drift. That would have been, had you laughed out of court. Until the 1980s, it was believed that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. If you'd asked any doctor around the world, they would have told you stress causes stomach ulcers.
And some still do.
Some still do. Yeah. It took two Australian scientists to theorise that it was in fact caused by a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. One of those Australian researchers swallowed a petri dish of Helicobacter pylori, and sure enough, it developed ulcers. And gradually, the scientific establishment came around to appreciating that these guys, who eventually won a Nobel Prize for their research, were right, and the scientific consensus was sadly awry.
And it is one of these things that, you know, I've got a list here from your book of the various things that people say as a defence mechanism, be it ad hominem, be it sort of appealing to the sort of fact that the scientists must be right.
The factoids they come out with about the snows on Kilimanjaro and sinking Maldives and
well,
Tuvalu.
I mean, this is it. Pacific islands such as Tuvalu will soon be swamped by rising sea levels, creating thousands of climate refugees.
Well, that ain't happened, has it?
And we've got the Maldives are in trouble. They must be. What about that dramatic photograph of the Maldives government holding a cabinet meeting underwater?
Yes, so that was staged by an environmental campaigner who paid a decent whack by the Maldives government, called Mark Linus.
Oh, right.
The same guy who put a cream pie in Bjorn Lomborg's face for having had the temerity to write The Sceptical Environmentalist.
Now, this is a book that really looked at what was there.
Well, funnily enough, Alex, that was really the book that changed everything for me. I mean, it was Bjorn Lomborg was one of the first people really to question this whole man-made. Well, more than that, the whole man-made, the whole environmental movement's claims about the world. You know, here was a guy, a left-wing Greenpeace member, professor of statistics in Denmark, who one day set his class the task of analysing the research of Julian Simon, who was known as the Doomslayer. Julian Simon was also a man of the left, an economist, who changed his view when he started analysing the data and realised that the doomsday scenarios of people like Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb, were essentially based on junk science. They simply were not borne out by the facts. And Lomborg...
And this is going back through the data, through the information that the IPCC reports and actually put out there as the reasons for what they were doing.
Obviously the IPCC didn't exist when Julian Simon was around, but yeah, I mean, that's right. Julian Simon did what Bjorn Lomborg did later, and what people like McIntyre and McKittrick did with the infamous hockey stick. You know, they looked at the hard evidence and found it wanting.
Now, wasn't there something about the hockey stick that this has been widely discredited, yet the guy behind it still says it's fine?
It keeps coming back. It's extraordinary.
And isn't this the one where it was actually proved you could put any data set into this and it still becomes a hockey stick?
That's right. The algorithm was such that if you fed the football results into this computer model,
Mm-hmm.
you would get this disturbing hockey stick
Right.
shape.
Goodness me, brings a whole new definition to the pools, doesn't
Yeah.
it, when you do that? Goodness me, goodness me. So we've got about a minute left. Which of the claims that are made to substantiate climate change do you find the most abhorrent? Which is the one that you think, good Lord, you can't really say that?
Well, I mean, there's the polar bears, and there's the melting glaciers, and there's there's Kilimanjaro and stuff. They're all part of the same problem. They're just what Tony Blair used to call eye-catching initiatives. They're designed to make, you know, the polar bear is fluffy and white, and we all like polar bears. We've all seen them on Fox's Glacier Mints and stuff, and they used to be on Cresta. Do you remember Cresta?
And that's precisely it. It's something
frothy,
that people
man.
can relate to.
Exactly.
James, thank you very much. And now, an important announcement for all viewers of On the Edge. As this station's flagship, it's important to keep our content moving on and to avoid getting stale. So from next week, we are really going to start mixing things up. Not only will you have a different special guest every week, you'll also have a different text jockey and a different presenter every edition too, giving an entirely different perspective on things, all under the control of a new producer. As one cultural commentator might have put it, it's going to be like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. As for me, I'm going to be looking at developing new programme formats for the station with the intention of bringing in new sponsorship, advertisers and viewers. I'm looking for alternatives to interview shows that can bring the truth to a wider audience. You know, the stubborn ones who refuse to accept that we are being lied to about almost everything. These could be polemical documentaries, panel shows, satire, just not more interview formats. We have to be a little more cunning in how we get the messages out. So now, it just leaves me to toast you all for your continuing support of Edge Media. To quote a late great friend, Barry Morse, to everything that might have been, to everything that was, to everything that might yet be. Be seeing you.
On the Edge in association with Uncensored Magazine.